What is Kabbalah? It is important to realize that the Kabbalah is more about losing ourselves than about finding, becoming more other-centered and less ego-centered. The literal translation of the word Kabbalah is that which is received. To receive, we must be receptive. We must open ourselves, creating a vessel in which to absorb that which we wish to understand or grasp, and in turn become part of Kabbalah. To open the self to a higher reality, to view the spirit within the matter, to raise our consciousness to the point where our perception of reality is completely changed and the divine within all creation is revealed. The three types of Kabbalah. Generally speaking, Kabbalah is divided into three categories. The theoretic, which concerns itself primarily with the inner dimensions of reality, the spiritual worlds, souls, angels, and the like, and the meditative, where the goal is to train the person who is studying to reach higher elevated meditative states of consciousness, and perhaps even a state of prophecy through employing the divine names. Later, presumptuous, and so forth. The third type of Kabbalah is the magical, which concerns itself with altering and influencing the course of nature. It is also uses the divine names, incantations, amulets, magical seals, and various other mystical exercises. With regards to the latter, the vast majority of the more important texts of magical Kabbalah have never been published, and perhaps for good reason. Besides being a highly complex issue to master, even when mastered, it can be at times dangerous. Many of the early Kabbalists have deemed the magical Kabbalah as a precious discipline. R. Joseph Deli, Reina, 1418 through 1472, was one of the great masters of the magical Kabbalah. Legend has it that he attempted to utilize his spiritual powers to bring the ultimate redemption, and in the process of failure, became spiritually injured. Some say he committed suicide, while others say that he transmogrified as an apostle. Others say that he simply went mad. Many Kabbalists in the generation that followed took his actions as a warning sign against practicing advanced transcendental and magical Kabbalah. From therein, the magical elements of Kabbalah have, for all intents and purposes, become extinct, and its knowledge has been completely forgotten. For whatever reason, meditative Kabbalah was also never really a popular discipline. One of the great proponents of meditative Kabbalah was R.W. Abraham Abulafia, 1240 through 1296. The mystical school he headed was primarily interested in method of reaching higher meditative states. He believed that through his method of meditation, one was able to attain a level of prophecy. He proposed using a writing mantra, meaning instead of the usual verbal or visual mantra, one should write a word repeatedly over and over again in various styles and configurations. One should attempt to alter the sequence of the word and to permute and cycle the letters of the word in every which way possible, combining and separating the letters, composing entire new motifs of letters, grouping them, and then joining them with other groups, and so on. This was done until one attained a heightened state of consciousness. Now, although Abu Alpha was a prolific writer and authored over 40 books in his lifetime, nonetheless, most of his work were never published. In fact, during his life, many of the other great Kabbalists opposed him and his teachings. Therefore, the Kabbalah, wherein the aim was to reach the transcendental state of consciousness, never became mainstream, even though on an individual level there were Kabbalists, especially the Kabbalists from the 16th century, Safi, who incorporated his teachings as a way to achieve elevated states of awareness and consciousness. What we are left with is theoretic dimensions of Kabbalah. The vast majority of the Kabbalah that has been and is continuously being produced are all within the domain of the theoretic. The main body of this type of Kabbalah is the sacred work of the Zohar, a book of teachings of the 2nd century Talmudic mystic Rabbi Shimon Bar Yoshi, I don't know how to pronounce these words, which were handed down from one generation to the next until they were published in the late 13th century by the Kabbalistic or Moshe de Leon. The 3 stages of the Kabbalah development of the theoretic Kabbalah. And it is the theoretic aspect of the Kabbalah that has been developed throughout all the ages and birth stages. For practical purpose, the tradition of this style of Kabbalah can be divided in three basic stages. The first is the era of the publication of the Zohar, with the mystical of that and the following generation who are to circulate these teachings. The second would be 16th century mystics who lived in the city of Seped. This particular period in history is referred to as the Great Kabbalistic Renaissance. The movement was steered by the profound and systematic teachings of R. Moshe Cordovero, known as the Ramak, 1522 through 1570, and particularly by the teachers of R. Yitzhak Luar, 1534 through 1572, whose subrequent was the Arzah, the G-DLY Rabbi Yitzhak of blessed memory. Ultimately, the third development of the Kabbalah was with the birth of R. Yisrael ben Elazar, 1698 through 1760, known as Bar Shem Tov, the master of the good name, was a co-founder of the Hasidic movement, which is a direct or indirect way has steered all the other mystic movements up until this present day. One who has only seen glimpses of the theoretic Kabbalah, the novice tends to view it as a writing repleted with fantasies, strange happenings, and images, fantastical, mystical landscapes, seemingly irrational, unrealistic, and unrelated to reality. Opening the classic work of theoretic Kabbalah, the Zohar, one is amazed at the author's imagination, but perhaps the fascination ends there. It seems to the novice to be a book of fantasy, nothing more. A famed Kabbalistic master, the Tazadik of Zitshava, once observed regarding the Kabbalah that these three stages in its development can be related to a parable. In a time when travel was a precious and arduous venture, most people had never been outside their little village. A man journeyed to a distant land. Upon his return, he gathered together the people of his village, enthusiastically related the great adventures of his voyage. He spoke of a bird he had seen in a distant land whose feathers were remarkable. For example, the bird's face was human. His legs were that of a giraffe. The villagers scoffed and dismissed the story as utter fantasy. Inspired by the adventures of his tales, a fellow villager set out on the same voyage, determined to see the world for himself. Years later, he returned to his village, a man of the world. Like the traveler who has so inspired him, he gathered the village folk and related his adventures. He too spoke of this fantastic bird, but the description was slightly different. The face of the bird, he said, was not actually human, although it closely resembled one, and the legs were long and spiny, and definitely brought to mind the giraffe. However, they were most certainly not actual giraffe's legs. Upon hearing this man's story, the villagers was divided. Some wholeheartedly believed this man, whose story was more convincing than the first traveler. Yet there were plenty of skeptics to whom the story still sounded entirely contrived and unrealistic. One of the villagers was determined to bring a final conclusion to the matter of this strange bird and undertook the arduous journey himself. Upon his return, he gathered together the villagers and triumphantly proclaimed, "The matter is settled," whereupon he reached onto his large bag and withdrew this strange and fantastic bird. This time there was not a skeptic to be found. This parable relates to the three stages in the development of the theoretical domain of Kabbalah. Forgive me, y'all. I keep on pronouncing Kabbalah because I don't know why. It just comes out that way. The author of the Zohar, the main body of Kabbalistic thought, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochia, I don't know how to pronounce this. All these names that I pronounce were incorrectly pronounced, not on purpose, but accidentally. Please forgive me. Was the first to describe the divine presence and our relationship with the Ein Sof. In the Zohar, we found such strange and fantastic tales, such mystical and mystical configurations and images that we can hardly believe. In the 16th century, in Safed, the city of mystics, the Kabbalah began to take on a more comprehensive, detailed form and analysis. Patterns and systematic thought process began to appear in Kabbalistic literature. Ultimately, with the birth of the Hasidic movement, Kabbalah has come to its full fruition. Hasidism is a mystical movement founded by R. Yisrael ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov. He brought the image of the Creator into reality. No longer were these mystical concepts far-fetched and unrealistic. Rather, they became a concrete part of our everyday lives, affecting every facet of creation. Heaven was brought down to earth.